Welcome to the BYD Seal, dual motored, 530 brake horsepower, fully electric car. And welcome to Nobby on Cars. And let's just do a little bit of background, due diligence if you will, on BYD. Literally yesterday, the guy who's in charge of BYD for Europe said, first of all, they're going to consider building a second plant. There's one in Hungary already, and they want to be the biggest seller of EVs in Europe by 2030. This is a company that didn't exist in Europe about 18 months ago. So they mean business. It's worth pointing out as well, it's not like they're testing the water in Europe. They've already launched the Atto 3, the Dolphin, the Seal. The Seal U is coming before the end of this year. And there's a Seagull as well, which they say will be under €20,000 for Europe. You can always add on a bit of extra change for Ireland in that. But still, that's 5 cars here in a massively short space of time. And again, in case you didn't know, the company stands for Build Your Dreams. It is a bit cheesy. They have other tiers of brands that we haven't really heard of here yet. It's not to say they'll never come, but they are a massive, massive company from China. They build their own batteries. They don't require anyone else to help with that. They install them into cars in different methods compared to traditional batteries, so cooling is not as much of a priority. They use LFP batteries, which are phosphate batteries. They are far happier being charged 100% all of the time. Apparently they have a better life cycle. They stand over them for longer. They say their batteries are good for 5,000 full charges. And they kind of dispel this idea that, like I only saw an article this morning, that a lot of people think batteries are good in EVs for 100,000 kilometers and that's it. And that's just not true. And I was going to trust anyone with the batteries, it will be BYD because they're literally in everything. Phones, solar panels, cars, buses, you name it. Speaking of batteries, then this one has a big one. Whether you go for the single motor, which is on the rear, or the dual motor, which is front and rear axle, they both get a smidgen under 83 kilowatt hour usable. So then taking a look around the back of the car, we have a boot that is quite decent, relatively speaking. There's space down below for cables and stuff like that, but the way it opens, the aperture is different to something like a 97, so it's not very practical. You can't put a dog box in there, you can't put a dog in there full stop because the boot fully closes. Not ideal. So that's one particular drawback. Obviously with the animal creature design going on and names, you have a bit of gill action over here, and also on the front of the car, little touches like that feature. Some of the cars have dolphin looking fins on the door handles, stuff like that. Why? Why not? Also in the boot comes a kind of a pack for window blinds and sunroof blinds. I don't know if you go to the hassle of that. It's quite darkened, so the back glass does work okay. Seats are comfortable. The premium feel of it, you know, the leather in particular is very good, or leather, because it's not actually leather. You know, that's where BYD sort of aren't competing with the likes of the Tesla, because their premium interiors probably are a bit better, and you could argue they're competing with maybe Audi and stuff. And even the door cards, the materials, just the back of the front driver and passenger seats, they all feel really good, as does the armrest. A lot of legroom space in the back here of the car as well, just to make your life easier for space and getting in and getting out of. Gets even more premium obviously in the front of the car. We have a nice wrapped steering wheel. This is all in dark mode, but that can be in really bright white mode if you like burning the eyes off yourself. Black just works best for me as far as I'm concerned. You've got 2 wireless charging plates down here. Very simple little nib to use for gear shifting. Different modes, because this is the all-wheel drive version, so you've got a snow mode and a sand mode down here. Extra storage below this kind of center spine in the car. Yes, this will do the party piece of putting it into portrait mode. I'm in two minds whether I prefer it that way. I'm obviously used to that style of design in a lot of EVs where they'll have this, but I think just for space-wise, it perhaps fits better in landscape. One of the big things you'll do every time you get into the car, every single time, is you're going to go into your settings here. You're going to go into ADAS, and you're going to go into driving assist, and you will click traffic sign recognition, because if you don't, every time you go over the speed limit, that thing is going to beep at you constantly. Now, it'll beep a lot anyway. It'll beep for if you think you're going to breach a junction without stopping. If you think you're going to hit anything. There are lots of reasons the beep comes on, but the driver monitor thing hasn't been a problem for me. It's just the speed that is, you've got to turn it off. And I just wonder, will someone someday almost develop, do you remember when you can jailbreak your phone, or you'd bother? I just wonder, will be something like that for hacks to get rid of these EU regs that just send you doolally in modern cars. Essentially, can it stand up to some of the interiors that you'll get from the more expensive brands? In some ways, yes. And I think you have to factor it into the overall product. If you, for example, were to think about the Mercedes EQE, they've recently dropped the price on that, but it was about 85,000. There's nothing that this car can't do that the Mercedes can. It just doesn't have a Mercedes badge. So I think when you factor in the overall price and you look at what you get, different finishes, different materials, I think it does stand up. You've got ambient lighting, all the safety aids you'd want, the panoramic glass roof, nice materials used throughout the cabin. One of the really bloody annoying things is you've got to use a USB-A cable to work CarPlay. If you don't do that, you've got to just use Bluetooth streaming. And the screen for Bluetooth streaming is really basic. It doesn't look good at all. Truly, the ethical question is, does any road-going car that's aimed at families, or really any car, need 530 brake horsepower? And in the context of everyday driving, you could probably strongly argue that the answer to that question is no. This version of the Seal will do 3.8 seconds to 60 miles an hour. So much so there's a badge in the back reminding everybody of that fact. And I think that's like a gaslighter for certain individuals in certain circumstances. I'd probably be getting that removed from the car straight away. There is the added bonus of this version having all-wheel drive, so it rains quite a bit in Ireland, so I get why you might want to have that, and maybe the extra power is just a Brucey bonus. But it's still an insane amount of power, and the standard version of the car will really do the job, as I've probably said quite a bit in this video. Suspension is a little bit more forgiving in the dual-motored version of it. There is a setting for chassis, but when you go in there, it's got nothing to do with the chassis, so I don't really know where BYD are going with that. Energy consumption, we're at about 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which for the power of the car, I don't know if you remember, or you indeed even saw my video of the i5 M60, that's similar power, and that was closer to 30 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers all day long. Wasn't as warm, but like still a big difference. And that 20 that I'm encountering in this car is across a mix of everything. Motorways, decent speeds, not all stop-start traffic. There's no two ways about it. Floor this car, and you feel pressure on your face as you're pushed back into your seat. You can just ever so feel the extra thump of power kicking in. I remember the way the Audi e-tron GT is geared. You feel that extra shove just as the two axles kick into life. It's probably smoother in this. Speaking of that car, you could have an Audi e-tron GT for well-spec'd about 120,000 euro. It's a Porsche Taycan underneath the skin, right? So it's twice the price of this. But this is essentially as quick, possibly quicker in some cases. Does it handle as well? No, it's not quite as sharp to drive as the e-tron GT. The way that car shifts for the weight of it is very impressive. But you have to be honest with yourself and say, when are you driving any car on the limit on the public roads? And that's not very often. 19-inch wheels on this really have no issue at all with the suspension. It's got a lovely balance of handling versus comfort. The biggest bugbear is just all the different beeps. I can go and buy a school now. It says school zone ahead on the nav, and that's very welcome. Blind spot is welcome. The driver monitoring system actually hasn't been too severe, but the speed thing, it's the first thing you're going to do every time is get into the car. It's just, yes, it only takes a couple of seconds, but it's a nuisance. It's annoying having to do it every single time because you couldn't possibly drive a car with the speed sign warning on. You just couldn't. If you don't fully turn it off, you'll still get your speed here in the quite useful screen for the driver. But if you fully turn it off, you'll just see the speed sign disappear fully. So then you don't have any idea of am I in, what speed's on, am I in without, signs on the side of the road, which aren't always there. Another top tip, if you find the aircon isn't really cutting the mustard, go into your AC settings and just check it's not on economy or eco. Nothing unusual about an eco setting, but it really does restrict how well the aircon works. So if you like things chilled, you find it's not enough, that's the setting that you need to find. Indicator is also on the opposite side you'd expect for a car in Europe. BYD said they're not changing that. So again, the power is just mind-blowing how quickly the acceleration on this is. Does it feel, as I mentioned, as nimble, as agile as the e-tron GT and cars like that? No, it doesn't. Not the same price. I think that's fair enough for that reason. Body roll though, there's a little. I mean, if you really chuck it, you can feel the thing trying to cope with the weight. It almost feels like the car is bending, or it has rear steering when you really throw it into those corners. But certainly in straight line, loads of grip, just blisteringly quick. Brakes are good. I mean, you do feel the weight of the car when you're really relying on them, but overall they're respectable enough. Wouldn't say they're the most amazing brakes in the world. I just love that you get a gap in the traffic, you're out the gap, literally speaking. So much power, it'll keep up with absolutely anything. And if that is worth the walk of whatever it is, 5,000 extra over, and that's not for the excellence trim, that's a question for you to figure out. For me, it could potentially be an awful lot of money for something that you can't use all the time. Something else that should be called out is the delivery charge on the car is only €2,000. That's a lot of money for a set of reg plates, a car wash, and I was going to say a tank of fuel. Not even a tank of fuel, just a full charge. So delivery charges, they're often a bone of contention with customers, but I do think on the heftier side in this car. Plenty of power, very relaxing to drive. Yeah, when you're really pushing it on, it could handle better. There are times when it definitely shows its weight. But as a car that you're going to use in everyday life, where you're not going to really notice that kind of stuff, I think you'd be very happy with it. But I do think the standard 340 odd brake is enough, and it's only really for bragging rights, or maybe you do a lot of driving in terrible driving conditions and you need the extra grip. That to me is the reason you'd go for the dual motor in the car. And maybe that says that the standard version is quite good in itself. Anyway, time for my summary. I do think BYD have rattled quite a few people, not least of all Ursula von der Leyen, for example. She hasn't specifically mentioned BYD, but she has mentioned Chinese companies coming to Europe with their supposedly subsidised cars, selling them at a discount and disrupting the market. And I just don't know if anything will come of that. There's talk of tariffs for Chinese cars coming to the EU. Got to look at BMW and VW as two examples who sell a lot of cars in China, not as many as they used to, it has to be said. But will they take China's ball and not give it back? I just don't necessarily see it happening. I've asked myself quite a few times reviewing the car this week, am I letting the price kind of blinker me in terms of cost cutting or cheap materials? I really don't think so. There's been a couple of complaints online about inconsistent charging speeds with the car. Anyone I know personally who's bought a Seal has been very, very happy with it. Some people have said the app is taking too long to get updates and get connected and stuff like that. A little bit of the materials in the boot perhaps are a little bit flimsy, but not a space you're going to spend a lot of time in. The most important parts are the driver's seat, passenger seat and the back seat, and that all feels really good to me. It's by no means a supercar, don't get me wrong. It's a family EV that isn't an SUV, which is nice for once. Actually, on drag coefficients 0.22, it's 0.01 of a difference between the new Model 3 and this. But I don't actually know, well, particularly this version of the car, you couldn't compare it to the Model 3, and even the single motor on the rear is quite a bit dearer than the new Model 3. It has to be pointed out for that as well. As an overall package though, it's got a huge amount of power. It's not bad to drive. Yes, in the corners it gets a little bit heavy and you kind of feel its weight, but it's something different, something unusual, and if you're happy enough to spend what is a big chunk of change on an electric car in today's market, then you could do a lot worse. That's the best way I can sum up the dual motor. But seriously, just get the standard motor. No one needs 530 brake horsepower. It's insane levels of power. You'll lose your license, and the other one will be cheaper to run. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you have any thoughts, any concerns, any comments on the BYD Seal or other Chinese or other EV cars that are on the market. I know there's a lot of noise out there, but I'm just going to keep ploughing on and seeing what's out there. Thanks for watching. Talk to you in the next one.